The morning air was crisp and quiet, the kind that made every breath feel sharp and clear. On a small street in the city, the bus stop stood empty except for a few people lost in their routines. Among them, an elderly woman moved slowly, her steps uneven and uncertain. Her gray hair was tied back loosely, and her face carried the marks of many years. She clutched a small handbag tightly against her chest, as though it were her anchor to the world around her. Her name was Mrs. Thompson, though most people passing by did not know it. She had Alzheimer's, a disease that made simple tasks confusing and frightening. Today, like many other days, she had left her apartment with the intention of visiting a friend, but the details were already slipping from her mind. She could not remember which bus to take or even the exact street she needed. She stopped, looked at the bus schedule, and then back at the street, her brow furrowed with worry. Around her, life continued as usual. People rushed by with headphones in, talking on phones or checking the time. Some glanced at her briefly but quickly looked away. A few muttered complaints under their breath, annoyed that she seemed to hesitate and block the way. It was as if her confusion made them uncomfortable, as if her presence reminded them of something they would rather ignore. Mrs. Thompson tried to read the bus sign again, squinting at the numbers and letters that seemed to blur before her eyes. She murmured to herself, fragments of sentences that made no sense. Bus. Friend. Her hands shook as she held her handbag. Each passing car, each moving figure made her more anxious. She wanted to sit down, but the bench at the stop was occupied and the people on it barely acknowledged her. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, feeling a rising panic. In her mind, she was lost in a fog. Faces of people she used to know flickered in memory, but they were gone now. The city felt cold, not just in temperature but in spirit. She felt invisible, a shadow among the bustling crowd. Tears welled up in her eyes and she blinked them back, not wanting anyone to see her weakness. Across the street, a young boy waited for the bus too. His name was Elijah. He was 12, full of energy, but also quiet and observant. Unlike the adults around him, he noticed things that others overlooked. He watched people hurrying past Mrs. Thompson, barely giving her a glance. Something about her made him stop and pay attention. Maybe it was the way she seemed so small and fragile, standing alone while the world moved on without her. Maybe it was something his grandmother had told him long ago. Notice those who need help even if no one else does. Elijah leaned on the railing, his eyes following her every movement. He saw the confusion in her eyes, the trembling of her hands, and the hesitant steps she took as if unsure of where she should be. A pang of concern hit him. He had seen elderly people struggle before, but this time, something told him he could do more than just notice. He waited for a moment, thinking about what to do. He could cross the street and ask if she needed help, or he could just stay on his side and watch. Most kids his age would have ignored her, lost in their own world of games and friends. But Elijah felt a strong pull to step in, to be the person who made her feel safe even for a few minutes. Taking a deep breath, he walked across the street. The morning wind brushed against his face, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and birds. He approached Mrs. Thompson slowly, not wanting to startle her. When he reached her, he spoke softly. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you need some help?" Mrs. Thompson turned toward him, her eyes wide with surprise. The world had treated her like she wasn't there, and now this boy had stopped to talk to her. She looked at him carefully, unsure if she could trust him. Her mind tried to remember who he was, why he was talking to her, but it was clouded with confusion. Bus, she said hesitantly, pointing toward the street. She wanted to explain more, but the words seemed to get stuck. She felt embarrassed that she could not even form a proper sentence, that her memory had failed her again. Elijah smiled gently. "It's okay. I can help you figure it out," he said. His voice was calm and kind, without any hint of judgment or impatience. He knew that people often made her feel small or invisible, but he wanted her to feel seen. He extended his hand lightly, not to grab her but to offer support. "Can I walk with you to the bus?" She hesitated, then nodded slightly. Something about his patience and warmth made her feel a little safer. Together they moved to the edge of the bus stop, away from the rushing crowd. Elijah pointed toward the schedule and began explaining the bus numbers slowly, one by one, making sure she could follow along. As they waited, Elijah started a small conversation to ease her anxiety. "Do you like mornings?" he asked. I like them because everything feels quiet and new. Mrs. Thompson blinked at him, her lips twitching as if trying to form a smile. I used to, she said softly, her voice trembling. She looked at him and felt a small spark of comfort. For a moment she was not alone, and that was a rare feeling these days. Elijah continued talking, asking gentle questions about her favorite foods, her childhood, and if she had pets. His curiosity was genuine and his words were simple. He didn't rush her answers or correct her when she forgot things. He simply listened, and with every word Mrs. Thompson relaxed a little. The tension in her shoulders eased, and she stopped worrying about the people who ignored her. The city around them continued its hurried pace, but for these two, time slowed down. Elijah's attention was focused entirely on her, making her feel important and cared for. Other commuters glanced at them, noticing the unusual sight of a young boy patiently helping an elderly woman. Some smiled quietly, a few nodded in approval, but most went about their day. Still, Elijah's focus never shifted. Minutes passed, and Mrs. Thompson began to remember the bus number she needed, though still with hesitation. She clutched Elijah's arm lightly as he guided her closer to the approaching bus. "Almost there," he said encouragingly. "You're doing great." As the bus arrived, the driver paused, noticing the pair carefully making their way to the door. Elijah helped her step up safely, making sure she had her balance and that her bag was secure. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with relief and gratitude. Elijah nodded, smiling. "You're welcome. Take care," he said softly, watching her find a seat. She turned and waved slightly, a small gesture of connection that spoke volumes. For her, this was more than a ride on a bus. It was a moment of human kindness, a reminder that even when the world feels cold and uncaring, there are still people who notice and help. As the bus drove away, Elijah stood at the stop for a moment, reflecting on what had just happened. He felt a warmth in his chest, a quiet satisfaction that he had made a difference in someone's day. It was not about praise or attention, he realized, but about noticing a person who needed help when others did not. He stepped back onto the sidewalk and continued waiting for his own bus, his mind still on Mrs. Thompson. He wondered if she would be okay, if she would make it to her destination safely. And deep down, he knew that even a small act of kindness could ripple out, changing not just her day, but perhaps the way others saw her too. In the hustle of the city, it was easy to overlook people like Mrs. Thompson, lost in their own struggles. But in that moment, she had been seen, she had been valued, and for Elijah, it was a lesson he would carry forever, that sometimes all it takes is one person noticing, one person stepping in, to bring light into someone else's life. The bus stop returned to its usual rhythm, the other commuters hurrying off without a second thought. But for Elijah, the morning was forever different. He had learned the quiet power of empathy, the kind that does not seek reward but simply exists to help. And Mrs. Thompson, somewhere on that bus, felt a little less alone in a world that often forgets the elderly, the confused, and the vulnerable. The bus rolled away, leaving Mrs. Thompson seated near the window, her hands folded on her lap. The ride was slow and steady, the engine humming softly beneath her. Outside, the city streets blurred past, but inside, she felt the warmth of a small hope, a fragile sense of safety she had not felt in a long time. Her mind still wandered, struggling to grasp details. But the memory of the boy who had stopped to help her, stayed firmly in her thoughts. Elijah, on the other hand, had returned to his side of the street, waiting for his own bus. He could not shake the image of Mrs. Thompson's worried face, nor the relief in her eyes when she realized someone cared. He watched the crowd around him, noticing again how most people were focused only on themselves, phones in hands, bags in arms, hurried steps on the pavement. Yet in that routine he saw the stark contrast of his small act of kindness. For a moment he imagined what it would be like if everyone noticed someone else's struggle, even briefly. The bus ride gave Mrs. Thompson time to reflect. She thought about how lonely she often felt in the city. Days blended together, neighbors remained strangers, and even familiar faces seemed distant. Alzheimer's had taken much from her memory, her independence, and sometimes even her confidence. But this morning something different had happened. Someone had seen her, not as a nuisance or an invisible figure, but as a person. She held on to that thought, and it made her chest feel lighter. Meanwhile, Elijah's bus arrived and he stepped on with quiet purpose. He found a seat by the window and watched the city roll by, thinking about Mrs. Thompson and the small conversation they had shared. It amazed him how much difference a few moments of attention could make. He remembered the way she had tried to speak clearly, the way her hands shook and the fragile way she had clutched her bag. It was easy to see that most people would have ignored her, but he had stopped. And stopping, he realized, mattered more than he had ever thought. The next day, Elijah returned to the same bus stop, as he often did on school days. The air was warmer, but the rhythm of the morning was the same. People rushing, cars honking, the usual sounds of a city waking up. He noticed Mrs. Thompson already standing at the stop, leaning slightly on her cane. Her eyes scanned the crowd nervously and her lips moved in quiet mutters. Something in her expression tugged at him immediately. She looked uncertain, as if she might not remember the way to the bus or even where she was supposed to be going. Elijah approached her slowly. "Good morning," he said softly. "Are you okay?" Mrs. Thompson looked at him and blinked. Recognition sparked in her eyes, though it was faint and fragile. "Oh, you helped me yesterday?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She tried to form a smile but found her lips trembling. "Yes," Elijah replied, smiling back. "I'm here again. Can I help you today too?" Her hands trembled as she adjusted her grip on her cane. For a moment she seemed hesitant, as if unsure whether she could trust anyone to help her. But then she nodded slowly. I would... "Thank you," she said. There was a small relief in her voice, a recognition that someone cared enough to notice her struggles once more. As they waited together, Elijah asked gentle questions, just as he had the day before. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Did you have breakfast?" His voice was patient, never rushing, never making her feel small. Mrs. Thompson answered slowly, and sometimes she forgot the details midway through. She repeated herself, paused often, and occasionally lost the thread of the conversation entirely. But Elijah never showed impatience. He listened, nodded, and helped her keep her place gently, as if guiding a delicate bird through the air. Other people at the bus stop noticed them. Some glanced with curiosity, others with mild irritation, but Elijah paid no attention. He focused entirely on Mrs. Thompson, keeping her steady and calm. He noticed how her hands were shaking slightly less today, how her shoulders seemed to relax a little more as they talked. His presence, small as it was, seemed to give her a measure of confidence she hadn't felt in years. At one point, Mrs. Thompson paused and looked at Elijah with a distant expression. "You remind me of my grandson," she said softly, her eyes filled with a hint of sadness but also warmth. He passed many years ago. Young, too soon." Her voice trailed off and she looked down at her hands. Elijah didn't try to fill the silence. He simply nodded and said quietly, "I'm glad to be here with you." That small phrase carried weight. It reminded Mrs. Thompson that she was not invisible, that someone genuinely cared about her presence. She smiled faintly, a fragile but real smile that seemed to soften the morning air. The bus arrived and Elijah again guided her carefully to the door. He checked that she had her bag, her cane, and that she was steady on her feet. The driver, who had seen the previous day's act as well, gave Elijah a small nod of approval. "Good boy," he muttered quietly as the doors closed behind them. Mrs. Thompson settled into a seat by the window. She held Elijah's words in her mind as she watched the streets pass by. She thought about how rare it was to meet someone like him, a person who noticed her, who cared enough to stop and help, who treated her like a human being rather than a problem. The feeling stayed with her, making the ride brighter than it had been in a long time. Elijah, on his way to school, replayed the morning in his head. He thought about how small moments could have a lasting impact, and how empathy was more powerful than most people realized. He knew that Mrs. Thompson might forget the details tomorrow, that Alzheimer's could cloud her memory, but he also knew that the feeling of being seen, even briefly, could linger. That was enough for him. Back at the bus stop, life continued around him. People rushed past, conversations buzzed, and the world moved at its usual hectic pace. But Elijah stood quietly, feeling the significance of his actions. He knew that kindness was not about recognition or reward, but about noticing someone else's need and stepping in. It was simple yet powerful. Later that day, Mrs. Thompson's daughter visited her at home. She had heard from a neighbor that a young boy had helped her mother at the bus stop. Her eyes filled with tears as Mrs. Thompson recounted the morning. He helped me. So kind, so patient, she said, struggling to find the words. Her daughter hugged her tightly, grateful that someone had shown her mother the care she deserved. That evening, Elijah reflected on the day while doing his homework. He felt proud but not boastful. He thought about how easily people overlooked Mrs. Thompson, how society often ignored those who struggled quietly, and how important it was for even one person to pay attention. He realized that anyone could make a difference no matter their age, if they simply took the time to notice someone else's struggle. Days passed, and Elijah continued to meet Mrs. Thompson at the bus stop whenever their schedules aligned. Each day he noticed subtle improvements, a steadier gait, a softer expression, a hint of trust forming between them. She began to anticipate his presence, her anxiety lessening as she recognized him. Other commuters started noticing too. Some smiled quietly at the pair, while others whispered to friends about the boy who always helped the elderly woman. Though Elijah never sought attention, his actions were quietly changing the atmosphere around the bus stop. People began to slow down just a little, and some even offered small gestures of help themselves. Through these mornings together, Mrs. Thompson began to feel a sense of connection she had not experienced in years. Alzheimer's still clouded parts of her mind, but in those moments with Elijah she felt clarity, safety, and dignity. She knew that the world could be harsh and uncaring, but she also knew that there were people who would stop, who would notice and who would care. And Elijah, in his quiet, patient way, learned one of life's most important lessons, that kindness was never wasted. Every small act had the power to lift someone's spirit, to ease someone's fear, and to remind someone that they mattered. The mornings had grown a quiet routine for Mrs. Thompson and Elijah. Each day she would arrive at the bus stop uncertain and anxious, and he would be there, waiting, ready to guide her with patience and kindness. The city around them moved fast and impatiently, but for a few minutes each morning time seemed to slow down. In those moments Mrs. Thompson could breathe, and Elijah could quietly learn what it meant to truly notice another person. One particular morning was colder than usual. The wind cut sharply through the streets, and the bus stop felt emptier than normal. Mrs. Thompson arrived, wrapped in her thick shawl, her hands slightly numb as she gripped her cane. She shivered and looked around, her eyes searching for the familiar face she had come to trust. When she saw Elijah step toward her with a gentle smile, her shoulders relaxed a little. "You're here," she whispered, a small relief in her voice. "Yes," Elijah replied softly. "I wouldn't miss it." They walked together toward the edge of the sidewalk, avoiding the puddles and slippery patches left from the night's rain. Elijah noticed the way she hesitated with every step, how her breathing was uneven, and he instinctively matched his pace to hers. His calm presence made her feel steady, as if she could take on the morning without fear. As they waited, Elijah began to talk in his usual gentle way. "Do you remember the park you liked when you were younger?" he asked. Mrs. Thompson's eyes flickered and a faint smile touched her lips. Yes, I used to go. Flowers, benches, children playing." Her voice was soft, hesitant, but there was a warmth there, a memory that Alzheimer's could not fully erase. Elijah listened intently. "What kind of flowers?" he asked, encouraging her to recall more details. "Roses, red, and sometimes daisies," she said, her fingers tightening around her cane as she pictured them in her mind. "I would sit, watch the world." "Peaceful." He nodded, smiling. It must have been beautiful. "I'd like to see it someday." Mrs. Thompson's eyes glistened. She had not shared memories like this with anyone in a long time. Most people hurried past her, uninterested or impatient, but Elijah's listening felt like a lifeline. For a brief moment she was not lost in confusion. She was connected to someone who cared, someone who was patient and present. As the minutes passed, other people began arriving at the bus stop. Most walked past quickly, absorbed in their phones or their conversations. Some looked at Mrs. Thompson and whispered to each other, their expressions a mix of curiosity and mild irritation at her slow pace. Yet Elijah paid them no attention. He stayed beside her, offering guidance, comfort, and conversation. "Do you like mornings?" he asked after a moment. I like them because everything feels calm before the day really begins. Mrs. Thompson nodded slowly. I used to, she said. Her eyes were far away, remembering times before Alzheimer's had made her life unpredictable. Now, I forget. Her voice trembled slightly and she looked down at her hands. Elijah placed his hand gently on her arm, not intrusive, but reassuring. It's okay, he said. You don't have to remember everything. We can just enjoy the morning together. She looked at him then, truly looked, and something shifted. She felt seen. In a world that often ignored her, this boy noticed her. He treated her with respect and kindness, not as a burden, but as a human being. She felt her heart lighten, a rare feeling that Alzheimer's had made scarce. When the bus finally arrived, Elijah helped her carefully, making sure she was steady on her feet and had her cane and bag. As she stepped onto the bus, she felt a sense of safety she hadn't felt in a long time. She waved slightly at him and he waved back, both of them smiling quietly. The ride, she knew, would not be frightening today. Later that day, Elijah returned home and thought about their morning. He reflected on how small acts of attention could create such a powerful effect on someone's life. He realized that Mrs. Thompson might not remember all the details of the day, but she would remember the feeling of being noticed, of being cared for, even for a few minutes. And that was enough. The next morning, something unusual happened. Mrs. Thompson arrived at the bus stop earlier than usual. Her steps were hesitant, but there was a determination in her pace. Elijah noticed immediately and walked toward her. You're early today? He said gently. She looked at him, her lips trembling slightly. I wanted to be on time, for once, she said softly. There was pride in her voice, and Elijah sensed that it was a rare moment for her. Alzheimer's often made her feel lost and incapable, but today she had managed something by herself. She had made a choice to be present, and that mattered. They waited together in silence for a few minutes, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Elijah noticed that Mrs. Thompson seemed calmer than usual. Her hands shook less and her breathing was steadier. She looked at the passing cars and people with a quiet focus, as if she was absorbing the world around her rather than being swallowed by it. As the bus approached, a young woman standing nearby whispered to her friend, "That boy always helps her. He's so kind." Elijah did not hear, but Mrs. Thompson did. She turned slightly and gave him a small, grateful smile. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time in a long while she felt understood. Elijah guided her onto the bus again, helping her find a seat and making sure she was comfortable. As he stepped back onto the sidewalk, he noticed a few people at the bus stop looking at him with curiosity or admiration. Some whispered to each other about the boy who always helped the elderly woman. But Elijah's focus remained on Mrs. Thompson, not on the attention. He had learned that true kindness required no reward, no applause, just genuine care and presence. Days turned into weeks and their routine solidified. Elijah continued to meet Mrs. Thompson at the bus stop, helping her navigate the city with patience and understanding. Each day she became slightly more confident, slightly more comfortable in the world that had once seemed so intimidating and cold. Their connection deepened over time. Mrs. Thompson began to share small pieces of her life with Elijah, stories of her childhood, her work as a teacher, her late husband, and her favorite memories with her grandson. She sometimes repeated details, sometimes mixed up events, but Elijah listened without judgment. He learned that Alzheimer's did not erase a person's essence, it simply made it harder for the world to see. And when someone took the time to notice, that essence could shine through again. Elijah also learned from her. He realized the importance of patience, the power of presence, and the value of listening. In a world that often rushed past people like Mrs. Thompson, he discovered that slowing down even for a few moments could create a lasting impact. One morning, Mrs. Thompson held Elijah's hand briefly as they approached the bus. "Thank you for noticing me," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "Most people just walk by." Elijah squeezed her hand gently. "I notice you every day," he said. "And I always will." She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was a rare gift, one that Alzheimer's could not take away. She felt a sense of dignity, of being seen, that had been missing for too long. And Elijah, standing there beside her, understood that this small act of kindness had created a bond neither of them would forget. The city around them continued in its usual rush. People hurried to buses and cars, talking on phones and checking watches. But at the corner of that busy street, time moved differently for Mrs. Thompson and Elijah. In those quiet moments, a simple act of attention, a gentle word, and a patient presence reminded them both of the power of human connection. And so, the routine continued, each day building trust, confidence, and friendship. Mrs. Thompson grew more comfortable, smiling more easily, and looking forward to the mornings with Elijah. He, in turn, felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference, not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of noticing and caring for someone who had been forgotten by many. The bond between them became a small beacon of hope, a reminder that even in a busy, indifferent world, one person could make a profound difference in the life of another. The days passed quietly, each morning blending into the next. Yet for Mrs. Thompson, each meeting with Elijah was becoming the brightest part of her day. She had begun to look forward to his arrival, the sound of his voice, and the comfort of knowing someone would walk beside her, patiently guiding her through the confusion that Alzheimer's brought. One morning, the city felt unusually busy. The streets were crowded with commuters, the air filled with the constant hum of engines and chatter. Mrs. Thompson shuffled toward the bus stop, gripping her cane tightly, her eyes darting from one figure to another as she searched for a familiar face. Anxiety crept into her steps and she paused, unsure of where she was supposed to stand. The crowd moved past her, oblivious, and she felt that familiar pang of isolation. Then Elijah appeared, weaving through the people with quiet determination. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," he said softly. His voice cut through the chaos, a small island of calm in the rushing city. She turned toward him, relief washing over her. The fear that had built as she approached the crowded streets began to ease. She felt seen. She felt safe. As they walked together toward the bus stop, Elijah noticed that her hands were trembling more than usual. "Do you want me to help you to the bench?" he asked gently. She nodded, grateful for his presence. He guided her carefully, keeping his pace slow and steady to match hers. Once she was seated, he stayed beside her, chatting quietly to keep her calm. "Did you have breakfast today?" he asked. "Yes." "I think so," she said, squinting at him, uncertain. "Or maybe. I don't remember." Her voice trailed off and she lowered her gaze. "That's okay," Elijah reassured her. "We can just enjoy the morning together. You don't have to remember everything." As the minutes passed, a few commuters began to take notice of the unusual pair. Most still walked by, absorbed in their own routines, but a few stopped to glance curiously. One woman whispered to her friend, "Look at that boy. He's always helping her. That's so sweet." Elijah remained focused on Mrs. Thompson, unaware of the murmurs. "Do you want to tell me about your favorite memory?" he asked. "Something that makes you happy?" Mrs. Thompson hesitated, then began speaking slowly. I remember. My husband, we used to walk by the river in the evenings. The water, reflecting. The sky." Her voice trembled, filled with a bittersweet nostalgia. It was peaceful." Elijah listened, nodding, encouraging her without interrupting. "That sounds beautiful," he said softly. "I can almost picture it." A small smile appeared on her face. For a moment, she was transported away from the busy city streets, away from the confusion and fear that Alzheimer's brought. She was with her husband again, walking by the river, feeling the calm evening air on her face. And beside her, Elijah's presence reminded her that even now she could still be guided, cared for, and understood. The bus approached, rumbling through the busy streets. Elijah helped her stand, adjusting his hold to support her as she moved slowly toward the door. The driver, familiar with their routine, smiled knowingly as he saw them approach. "Good morning," he said, nodding. Mrs. Thompson boarded the bus with Elijah's steady guidance, holding onto her cane and bag. She found a seat by the window, and for a moment she looked around the bus with a mix of nervousness and curiosity. The city moved outside in a blur, but inside she felt a rare sense of calm and safety. Elijah stepped back onto the sidewalk, breathing a small sigh of relief. He knew she was secure, and he felt the quiet satisfaction that came from helping someone in need. But as he watched her settle into her seat, he noticed a few people at the bus stop watching him. Some were curious, some impressed, and some seemed inspired. He felt a little awkward under their gaze, but he focused on the feeling of having made a difference in Mrs. Thompson's morning. That afternoon, Mrs. Thompson's daughter visited her mother. She had heard from a neighbor about Elijah, the young boy who consistently helped her mother at the bus stop. Her eyes filled with tears as her mother recounted the morning. He helped me. He's so kind. He makes me feel safe," she said, her voice trembling. Her daughter hugged her tightly, grateful that her mother had someone noticing her needs in a world that often overlooked her. Word began to spread quietly through the neighborhood. People discussed the boy who stopped to help an elderly woman with Alzheimer's. Some were curious about his motives, others inspired to be kinder themselves. Elijah remained unaware of the growing attention. His actions were never about recognition. They were about doing what was right, simple as that. Over the next few days, Elijah continued his routine, always arriving at the bus stop to help Mrs. Thompson. Their conversations deepened. She shared more memories, some joyful, some tinged with sadness. He listened to stories of her childhood, her work, her family, and even small everyday moments she treasured. Alzheimer's often caused her to repeat herself, to mix up events, but Elijah never seemed impatient. He always listened, guiding her gently back to the thread of her story when needed. One morning, as the bus approached, a small crowd had gathered at the stop, curious to witness the routine they had heard about. Some people whispered to each other, admiring the boy's dedication. Elijah, however, remained focused on Mrs. Thompson, offering his support as she prepared to board. When she settled into her seat, one of the onlookers, a man in a suit, approached Elijah. "That was remarkable," he said quietly. "Most people wouldn't even notice her, let alone help her like you do." Elijah shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I just wanted to make sure she's safe," he said simply. The man nodded, clearly impressed. "You're teaching everyone here a lesson about kindness," he said, then walked away. As the bus drove away, Mrs. Thompson felt a rare sense of comfort and dignity. Alzheimer's had taken much from her, but in these moments with Elijah she felt seen and cared for. She held on to the feeling tightly, letting it lift her spirits. Elijah walked away from the bus stop slowly, reflecting on the day. He thought about the difference one person could make, how small gestures of attention and kindness could ripple outward in ways he could not yet see. Even if Mrs. Thompson forgot details tomorrow, he knew she would remember the feeling of being noticed and supported, and that alone was powerful. Days turned into weeks, and their bond strengthened. Mrs. Thompson began to anticipate Elijah's arrival, and Elijah grew more aware of her needs and moods. Each morning became a small ritual of patience, care, and shared humanity. They laughed quietly at little jokes, shared memories, and comforted each other in moments of uncertainty. Their connection also began to influence others. People who regularly passed by started to slow down, offering small gestures of help, holding doors, assisting with bags, or giving a friendly smile. Elijah's quiet example showed them that noticing someone in need could change their day, just as it had changed Mrs. Thompson's. One day, as the bus approached, Mrs. Thompson grasped Elijah's hand gently. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. "You make me feel alive again." Her eyes glistened, and Elijah felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought that such a small act could have such a profound impact. He squeezed her hand lightly. "I'm glad," he said softly. "I'll always be here for you." As the bus drove off, the city continued in its usual rush, but for Mrs. Thompson and Elijah, time moved differently. They had created a small sanctuary in the midst of a busy world, a space where patience, kindness, and attention to another human being mattered more than anything else, and so, the quiet story of one boy and one elderly woman began to ripple outward. In a world that often ignored those who struggled, they had shown that noticing, caring, and helping could transform lives, not through grand gestures, but through simple, consistent acts of humanity. The routine continued, each morning bringing Elijah and Mrs. Thompson together at the bus stop. Over time, their bond grew stronger, rooted in quiet understanding and trust. The city moved around them in its usual rush, but for these two, the morning had become a space of calm, patience, and connection. Mrs. Thompson, who once felt invisible and frightened, now looked forward to Elijah's presence. Each day it reminded her that someone noticed, someone cared. One morning as they approached the bus stop, Mrs. Thompson paused and looked at Elijah with a thoughtful expression. You have done so much for me," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to thank you." Elijah smiled gently. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I like helping. And I like spending time with you." She nodded slowly, her eyes misty. You are very special. Very rare." Her words hung in the cold morning air, carrying the weight of years of loneliness and worry. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply stood together, feeling the quiet strength of their connection. The bus arrived, rumbling through the streets, and Elijah guided her carefully to the door. He made sure her cane was secure, her bag close, and that she was steady on her feet. She climbed aboard and found her usual seat by the window, holding on to the small comfort that this boy's presence had brought her. Later that day, news of Elijah's kindness began to spread more widely. A local neighbor who had seen the interaction and quietly admired it for weeks decided to share the story online. Photos were posted, describing how a young boy consistently helped an elderly woman with Alzheimer's at the bus stop, giving her comfort, dignity, and safety. People across the city began to comment, many expressing admiration and surprise at such selfless behavior from someone so young. The attention was overwhelming for Elijah when he first learned of it. His mother showed him the post and smiled proudly. "People are noticing what you do," she said softly. "You're inspiring others to be kind." Elijah shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I was just helping," he said. "I didn't think about anyone noticing." But the impact of his actions reached far beyond what he had imagined. Local news outlets picked up the story. Neighbors spoke to each other about it, and the bus company even mentioned him in a small community newsletter. Everyone marveled at how such a simple, consistent act of care could create ripples across a whole neighborhood. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson felt the warmth of these changes even more deeply. She didn't fully understand all the attention, but she could sense that people were looking at her differently. No longer invisible, she felt acknowledged and respected. More importantly, she had Elijah by her side each morning, steadying her, encouraging her, and helping her feel safe in the world once again. One day, Elijah arrived at the bus stop to find Mrs. Thompson waiting, a small envelope in her hand. She looked at him, a shy smile on her lips. I wanted to give you something," she said softly, extending it toward him. Elijah took the envelope carefully, surprised. "Thank you," he said. "You don't have to give me anything." She shook her head gently. I want to," she said. You have given me so much courage, comfort, joy. I want you to have this." Inside the envelope was a handwritten note, simple but full of meaning. She had written about how much Elijah's presence had changed her mornings, her days, and her life. She spoke of gratitude, of feeling seen, and of how his kindness had reminded her of the goodness in the world. Elijah read it quietly, feeling a lump in his throat. "It's really beautiful," he said softly, looking up at her. "I'll treasure it." From that moment, the bond between them felt stronger than ever. They continued their routine, but now with an added sense of purpose. Elijah's actions were no longer just small acts of kindness. They had become a symbol of hope, empathy, and human connection in a world that often ignored the vulnerable. Over the following weeks, Mrs. Thompson's family became more involved. They thanked Elijah personally, bringing small gifts and expressing their heartfelt gratitude. Her daughter told him, "You've given my mother more than just help at the bus stop. You've given her dignity and comfort, something we couldn't always provide." Elijah smiled quietly, knowing that he had not done anything extraordinary. He had simply noticed, cared, and acted. Yet the effect of his simple, consistent presence was undeniable. He had reminded Mrs. Thompson and everyone around them of the power of human empathy. The story even reached a local community center, which invited Elijah to speak to other children about kindness and helping others. Though shy at first, he shared his experiences, explaining that making a difference did not require wealth, fame, or grand gestures. It only required attention, patience, and the willingness to step in when someone was struggling. People began to reflect on their own actions. Commuters at the bus stop who had once ignored Mrs. Thompson started pausing, offering assistance or simply smiling as she approached. Elijah's quiet example had created a ripple effect, encouraging others to act with empathy in small but meaningful ways. One chilly morning, as Elijah guided Mrs. Thompson toward the bus, she paused and looked at him with a gentle seriousness. You remind me of all the good people still left in the world," she said. I, I have hope because of you." Elijah felt a warmth spread through him. He understood more deeply than ever that even one person noticing, one person showing care, could change another person's life in ways that lasted far beyond a single moment. As the bus doors closed behind Mrs. Thompson that morning, she waved at Elijah with a genuine, heartfelt smile. He waved back, feeling the quiet satisfaction of having made a difference. The city continued around them, bustling and fast, but in those small, shared moments, humanity shone brightly. Weeks later, Elijah reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about Mrs. Thompson's fear and confusion, the mornings when she had been alone and anxious, and the transformation that had come through simple acts of presence and attention. He understood now that empathy was a quiet, powerful force, capable of touching lives in ways that could never be measured. Mrs. Thompson, for her part, had regained a sense of confidence and dignity. Alzheimer still challenged her, but the mornings with Elijah reminded her that she was not alone, that her life still had meaning and value, and that small acts of kindness could create a world of difference. The story of the boy and the elderly woman became well known in their community. But Elijah never sought attention or recognition. For him, the reward was simple: seeing Mrs. Thompson safe, calm, and happy. He had learned a lesson that many adults struggle to understand, that noticing someone in need, and taking the time to help, could ripple outward in ways that changed more than one life. And so, their mornings continued day after day, a quiet testament to the power of human connection. The bus stop, once just a place of waiting, had become a space of kindness, empathy, and hope. Through their simple, consistent actions, Elijah and Mrs. Thompson reminded everyone around them that, even in a world that often moved too fast to notice, the smallest acts of care could create lasting change. In the end, it was not about fame, recognition, or grand gestures. It was about seeing someone, offering help, and showing patience and understanding. It was about the power of empathy, the value of connection, and the enduring impact of kindness. Elijah had stepped in, noticing a woman who had been overlooked by many. In doing so, he had changed her life, inspired a community, and created a story of hope that would linger long after the bus drove away. And Mrs. Thompson, finally feeling safe, cared for, and seen, could face each day with courage, warmth, and the quiet joy of knowing that even in a fast, busy world, human kindness still existed, and it could be found in the heart of a young boy.